Wake up with Wake.
Ways to cultivate a mental attitude by becoming interested in others. Every day, do a good deed that will put a smile of joy on someone's face. Part 4 in a nutshell. 7 ways to cultivate a mental attitude that will bring you peace and happiness. Rule 1. Let's fill our minds with thoughts of peace, courage, health, and hope, for our life is what our thoughts make it. Rule 2. Let's never try to get even with our enemies, because if we do, we will hurt ourselves far more than we hurt them. Let's do as General Eisenhower does. Let's never waste a minute thinking about people we don't like. Rule 3. A. Instead of worrying about ingratitude, let's expect it. Let's remember that Jesus healed 10 lepers in one day, and only one thanked him. Why should we expect more gratitude than Jesus got? B. Let's remember that the only way to find happiness is not to expect gratitude, but to give for the joy of giving. C. Let's remember that gratitude is a cultivated trait, so that if we want our children to be grateful, we must train them to be grateful. Rule 4. Count your blessings, not your troubles. Rule 5. Let's not imitate others. Let's find ourselves and be ourselves. For envy is ignorance, and imitation is suicide. Rule 6. When fate hands us a lemon, let's try to make a lemonade. Rule 7. Let's forget our own unhappiness by trying to create a little happiness for others. When you're good to others, you are best to yourself. Part 5. The Perfect Way to Conquer Worry. Chapter 19. How My Mother and Father Conquered Worry. As I have said, I was born and brought up on a Missouri farm. Like most farmers of that day, my parents had pretty hard scratching. My mother had been a country school teacher. My father had been a farmhand working for $12 a month. Mother made not only my clothes, but also the soap with which we washed our clothes. We rarely had any cash, except once a year when we sold our hogs. We traded our butter and eggs at the grocery store for flour, sugar, coffee. When I was 12 years old, I didn't have as much as 50 cents a year to spend on myself. I can still remember the day we went to a 4th of July celebration, and Father gave me 10 cents to spend as I wished. I felt the wealth of the Indies was mine. I walked a mile to attend a one-room country school. I walked when the snow was deep and the thermometer shivered around 28 degrees below zero. Until I was 14, I never had any rubbers or overshoes. During the long, cold winters, my feet were always wet and cold. As a child, I never dreamed that anyone had dry, warm feet during the winter. My parents slaved 16 hours a day, yet we constantly were oppressed by debts and harassed by hard luck. One of my earliest memories is watching the floodwaters of the 102 River rolling over our corn and hayfields, destroying everything. The floods destroyed our crops 6 years out of 7. Year after year, our hogs died of cholera, and we burned them. I can close my eyes now and recall the pungent odor of burning hog flesh. One year, the floods didn't come. We raised a bumper corn crop, bought feed cattle, fattened them with our own corn. The floods might just as well have drowned our corn that year, for the price of fat cattle fell on the Chicago market, and after feeding and fattening the cattle, we got only $30 more for them than we'd paid for them. $30 for a whole year's work. No matter what we did, we lost money. I can still remember the mule colts that my father bought. We fed them for 3 years, hired men to break them, then shipped them to Memphis, Tennessee, and sold them for less than what we'd paid for them 3 years previously. After 10 years of hard, grueling work, we were not only penniless, we were heavily in debt. Our farm was mortgaged. Try as hard as we might, we couldn't even pay the interest on the mortgage. The bank that held the mortgage abused and insulted my father and threatened to take his farm away from him. Father was 47 years old. After more than 30 years of hard work, he had nothing but debts and humiliation. It was more than he could take. He worried. His health broke. He had no desire for food. In spite of the hard physical work he was doing in the field all day, he had to take medicine to give him an appetite. He lost flesh. The doctor told my mother that he'd be dead within 6 months. Father was so worried that he no longer wanted to live. I've often heard my mother say that when Father went to the barn to feed the horses and milk the cows and didn't come back as soon as she expected, she'd go out to the barn, fearing that she would find his body dangling from the end of a rope. One day, as he returned home from Maryville, where the banker had threatened to foreclose the mortgage, he stopped his horses on a bridge crossing the 102 River, got off the wagon, and stood there for a long time, looking down at the water, debating with himself whether he should jump in and end it all. Years later, Father told me that the only reason he didn't jump was because of my mother's deep, abiding, and joyous belief that if we loved God and kept his commandments, everything would come out all right. My mother was right. Everything did come out all right in the end. Father lived 42 happy years longer and died in 1941 at the age of 89. During all those years of struggle and heartache, my mother never worried. She took all her troubles to God in prayer. Every night before we went to bed, Mother would read a chapter from the Bible. Frequently, Mother or Father would read these comforting words of Jesus. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there ye may be also. Then we all knelt down before our chairs in that lonely Missouri farmhouse and prayed for God's love and protection. When William James was professor of philosophy at Harvard, he said, "Of course, the sovereign cure for worry is religious faith." You don't have to go to Harvard to discover that. My mother found that out on a Missouri farm. Neither floods, nor debts, nor disaster could suppress her happy, radiant, and victorious spirit. I can still hear her singing as she worked, "Peace, peace, wonderful peace, flowing down from the Father above. Sweep over my spirit forever, I pray, in fathomless billows of love." My mother wanted me to devote my life to religious work. I thought seriously of becoming a foreign missionary. Then I went away to college, and gradually as the years passed, a change came over me. I studied biology, science, philosophy, and comparative religions. I read books on how the Bible was written. I began to question many of its assertions. I began to doubt many of the narrow doctrines taught by the country preachers of that day. I was bewildered. Like Walt Whitman, I felt the curious, abrupt questioning stir within me. I didn't know what to believe. I saw no purpose in life. I stopped praying. I became an agnostic. I believed that all life was planless and aimless. I believed that human beings had no more divine purpose than had the dinosaurs that roamed the earth 200 million years ago. I felt that someday the human race would perish, just as the dinosaurs had. I knew that science taught that the sun was slowly cooling and that when its temperature fell even 10%, no form of life could exist on Earth. I sneered at the idea of a beneficent God who had created man in his own likeness. I believed that the billions upon billions of suns whirling through black, cold, lifeless space had been created by blind force. Maybe they'd never been created at all. Maybe they had existed forever, just as time and space have always existed. Do I profess to know the answers to all those questions now? No. No man has ever been able to explain the mystery of the universe, the mystery of life. We're surrounded by mysteries. The operation of your body is a profound mystery. So is the electricity in your home. So is the flower in the crannied wall. So is the green grass outside your window. Charles F. Kettering, the guiding genius of General Motors Research Laboratories, gave Antioch College $30,000 a year out of his own pocket to try to discover why grass is green. He declared that if we knew how grass is able to transfer sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into food sugar, we could transform civilization. Even the operation of the engine in your car is a profound mystery. General Motors Research Laboratories have spent years of time and millions of dollars trying to find out how and why a spark in the cylinder sets off an explosion that makes your car run. The fact that we don't understand totally the mysteries of our bodies or electricity or a gas engine doesn't keep us from using and enjoying them. The fact that I don't understand the mysteries of prayer and religion no longer keeps me from enjoying the richer, happier life that religion brings. At long last, I realize the wisdom of Santayana's words. Man is not made to understand life, but to live it. I have gone back, well, I was about to say I had gone back to religion, but that would not be accurate. I have gone forward to a new concept of religion. I no longer have the faintest interest in the differences in creeds that divide the churches, but I'm tremendously interested in what religion does for me, just as I'm interested in what electricity and good food and water do for me. They help me to lead a richer, fuller, happier life. But religion does far more than that. It brings me spiritual values. It gives me, as William James put it, a new zest for life, a larger, richer, more satisfying life. It gives me faith, hope, and courage. It banishes tensions, anxieties, fears, and worries. It gives purpose to my life and direction. It vastly improves my happiness. It gives me abounding health. It helps me to create for myself an oasis of peace amidst the whirling sands of life. Francis Bacon was right when he said over 300 years ago, "A little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion." I can remember the days when people talked about the conflict between science and religion, but no more. The newest of all sciences, psychiatry, is teaching what Jesus taught. Why? Because psychiatrists realize that prayer and a strong religious faith will banish the worries, the anxieties, the strains and fears that cause more than half of all our ills. They know, as one of their leaders, Dr. A. Brill, said, anyone who is truly religious does not develop a neurosis. If religion isn't true, then life is meaningless. It is a tragic farce. I interviewed Henry Ford a few years prior to his death. Before I met him, I had expected him to show the strains of the long years he'd spent in building up and managing one of the world's greatest businesses. So I was surprised to see how calm and well and peaceful he looked at 78. When I asked him if he ever worried, he replied, "No, I believe God is managing affairs and that he doesn't need any advice from me. With God in charge, I believe that everything will work out for the best in the end. So what is there to worry about?" Today, even many psychiatrists are becoming modern evangelists. They're not urging us to lead religious lives to avoid hellfires in the next world, but they are urging us to lead religious lives to avoid the hellfires of stomach ulcer, angina pectoris, nervous breakdowns, and insanity. As an example of what our psychologists and psychiatrists are teaching, read The Return to Religion by Dr. Henry C. Link. Yes, the Christian religion is an inspiring, health-giving activity. Jesus said, "I came that ye might have life and have it more abundantly." Jesus denounced and attacked the dry forms and dead rituals that passed for religion in his day. He was a rebel. He preached a new kind of religion, a religion that threatened to upset the world. This is why he was crucified. He preached that religion should exist for man, not man for religion, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He talked more about fear than he did about sin. The wrong kind of fear is a sin against your health, a sin against the richer, fuller, happier, courageous life that Jesus advocated. Emerson spoke of himself as a professor of the science of joy. Jesus, too, was a teacher of the science of joy. He commanded his disciples to rejoice and leap for joy. Jesus declared that there were only two important things about religion: loving God with all our heart and our neighbor as ourselves. Any man who does that is religious regardless of whether he knows it. My father-in-law, Henry Price of Tulsa, Oklahoma, is a good example. He tries to live by the golden rule, and he is incapable of doing anything mean, selfish, or dishonest. However, he doesn't attend church and regards himself as an agnostic. Nonsense. What makes a man a Christian? I'll let John Bailey answer that. He was a distinguished professor who taught theology at the University of Edinburgh. He said, "What makes a man a Christian is neither his intellectual acceptance of certain ideas, nor his conformity to a certain rule, but his possession of a certain spirit, and his participation in a certain life." If that makes a man a Christian, then Henry Price is a noble one. William James, the father of modern psychology, wrote to his friend Professor Thomas Davidson, saying that as the years went by, he found himself less and less able to get along without God. Earlier in this book, I mentioned that when the judges tried to pick the best story on worry sent in by my students, they had so much difficulty in choosing between two outstanding stories that the prize money was split. Here's the second story that tied for first prize: the unforgettable experience of a woman who had to find out the hard way that she couldn't get along without God. I'm calling this woman Mary Cushman, although that's not her actual name. She has children and grandchildren who might be embarrassed to see her story in print, so I agreed to disguise her identity. However, the woman herself is real, very real. Here's how her story goes. During the Depression, she said, my husband's average salary was $18 a week. Many times we didn't even have that because he didn't get paid when he was ill, and that was often. He had a series of minor accidents. He also had mumps, scarlet fever, and repeated attacks of flu. We lost the little house that we built with our own hands. We owed $50 at the grocery store and had 5 children to feed. I took in washing and ironing from the neighbors and bought second-hand clothes from the Salvation Army store and made them over for my children to wear. I made myself ill with worry. One day, the grocer to whom we owed $50 accused my 11-year-old boy of stealing a couple of pencils. My son wept as he told me about it. I knew he was honest and sensitive, and I knew that he'd been disgraced and humiliated in front of other people. That was the straw that broke my back. I thought of all the misery we had endured, and I couldn't see any hope for the future. I must have become temporarily insane with worry, for I shut off my washing machine, took my little 5-year-old daughter up to the bedroom, and plugged up the windows and cracks with paper and rags. My little girl said to me, "Mommy, what are you doing?" I answered, "There's a little draft in here." Then I turned on the gas heater we had in the bedroom and didn't light it. As I lay down on the bed with my daughter beside me, she said, "Mommy, this is funny. We just got up a little while ago." But I said, "Never mind, we'll take a little nap." Then I closed my eyes, listening to the gas escape from the heater. I shall never forget the smell of that gas. Suddenly, I thought I heard music. I listened. I'd forgotten to turn the radio off in the kitchen. It didn't matter now, but the music kept on, and presently I heard someone singing an old hymn. What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pains we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. As I listened to that hymn, I realized I'd made a tragic mistake. I'd tried to fight all my terrible battles alone. I'd not taken everything to God in prayer. I jumped up, turned off the gas, opened the door, and raised the windows. I wept and prayed all the rest of that day. Only I didn't pray for help. Instead, I poured out my soul in thanksgiving to God for all the blessings He had given me. 5 splendid children, all of them healthy and fine, strong in body and mind. I promised God that never again would I prove so ungrateful, and I have kept that promise. Even after we lost our home and had to move into a little country schoolhouse that we rented for $5 a month, I thanked God for that schoolhouse. I thanked him for the fact that at least I had a roof to keep us warm and dry. I thanked God honestly that things were not worse, and I believe that he heard me. For in time things improved, no, not overnight, but as the Depression lightened, we made a little more money. I got a job as a hat check girl in a large country club and sold stockings as a sideline. To help put himself through college, one of my sons got a job on a farm, milked 13 cows morning and night. Today, my children are grown up and married. I have 3 fine grandchildren. And as I look back on that terrible day when I turned on the gas, I thank God over and over that I woke up in time. What joys I would have missed if I'd carried out that act. How many wonderful years I would have forfeited forever. Whenever I hear now of someone who wants to end his life, I feel like crying out, don't do it, don't. The blackest moments we live through can only last a little time, and then comes the future. On the average, someone commits suicide in these United States every 35 minutes. On the average, someone goes insane every 120 seconds. Most of these suicides, and probably many of the tragedies of insanity, could have been prevented if these people had only had the solace and peace that are found in religion and prayer. One of the most distinguished of psychiatrists, Dr. Carl Jung, says on page 264 of his book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, during the past 30 years, people from all the civilized countries of the earth have consulted me. I have treated many hundreds of patients. Among all my patients in the second half of life, that is to say over 35, there has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. It is safe to say that every one of them fell ill because he had lost that which the living religions of every age have given to their followers, and none of them has been really healed who did not regain his religious outlook. That statement is so significant, I want to repeat it. Dr. Carl Jung said, during the past 30 years, people from all the civilized countries of the earth have consulted me. I have treated many hundreds of patients. Among all my patients in the second half of life, that is to say over 35, there has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. It is safe to say that every one of them fell ill because he had lost that which the living religions of every age have given to their followers, and none of them has been really healed who did not regain his religious outlook. William James said approximately the same thing. Faith is one of the forces by which men live, he declared, and the total absence of it means collapse. The late Mahatma Gandhi, the greatest Indian leader since Buddha, would have collapsed if he had not been inspired by the sustaining power of prayer. How do I know? Because Gandhi himself said so. Without prayer, he wrote, I should have been a lunatic long ago. Thousands of people could give similar testimony. My own father, well, as I've already said, my own father would have drowned himself if it had not been for my mother's prayers and faith. Probably thousands of the tortured souls who are now screaming in our insane asylums could have been saved if they had only turned to a higher power for help, instead of trying to fight life's battles alone. When we are harassed and reach the limit of our strength, many of us then turn in desperation to God. There are no atheists in foxholes. But why wait until we're desperate? Why not renew our strength every day? Why wait even till Sunday? For years, I've had the habit of dropping into empty churches on weekday afternoons. When I feel that I'm too rushed and hurried to spare a few minutes to think about spiritual things, I say to myself, wait a minute, Dale Carnegie, wait a minute. Why all the feverish hurry and rush, little man? You need to pause and acquire a little perspective. At such times, I frequently drop into the first church that I find open. Although I'm a Protestant, I frequently on weekday afternoons drop into St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue and remind myself that I'll be dead in another 30 years, but that the great spiritual truths that all churches teach are eternal. I close my eyes and pray. I find that doing this calms my nerves, rests my body, clarifies my perspective, and helps me revalue my values. May I recommend this practice to you. During the past 6 years that I've been writing this book, I've collected hundreds of examples and concrete cases of how men and women conquered fear and worry by prayer. I have in my filing cabinet folders bulging with case histories. Let's take as a typical example the story of a discouraged and disheartened book salesman, John R. Anthony of Houston, Texas. Here's his story as he told it to me. 22 years ago, I closed my private law office to become state representative of an American law book company. My specialty was selling a set of law books to lawyers, a set of books that were almost indispensable. I was ably and thoroughly trained for the job. I knew all the direct sales talks and the convincing answers to all possible objections. Before calling on a prospect, I familiarized myself with his rating as an attorney, the nature of his practice, his politics and hobbies. During my interview, I used that information with ample skill, yet something was wrong. I just couldn't get orders. I grew discouraged. As the days and weeks passed, I doubled and redoubled my efforts, but was still unable to close enough sales to pay my expenses. A sense of fear and dread grew within me. I became afraid to call on people. Before I could enter a prospect's office, that feeling of dread flared up so strong I'd pace up and down the hallway outside the door, or go out of the building and circle the block. Then, after losing much valuable time and feigning enough courage by sheer willpower to crash the office door, I feebly turned the doorknob with trembling hand, half hoping my prospect would not be in. My sales manager threatened to stop my advances if I didn't send in more orders. My wife at home pleaded with me for money to pay the grocery bill for herself and our 3 children. Worry seized me. Day by day, I grew more desperate. I didn't know what to do. As I've already said, I'd closed my private law office at home and had given up my clients. Now I was broke. I didn't have the money to pay even my hotel bill. Neither did I have the money to buy a ticket back home, nor did I have the courage to return home a beaten man, even if I had the ticket. Finally, at the miserable end of another bad day, I trudged back to my hotel room. For the last time, I thought. So far as I was concerned, I was thoroughly beaten. Heartbroken, depressed, I didn't know which way to turn. I hardly cared whether I lived or died. I was sorry I had ever been born. I had nothing but a glass of hot milk that night for dinner. Even that was more than I could afford. I understood that night why desperate men raise a hotel window and jump. I might have done it myself if I'd had the courage. I began wondering what was the purpose of life. I didn't know. I couldn't figure it out. Since there was no one else to turn to, I turned to God. I began to pray. I implored the Almighty to give me light and understanding and guidance through the dark, dense wilderness of despair that had closed in about me. I asked God to help me get orders for my books and to give me money to feed my wife and children. After that prayer, I opened my eyes and saw a Gideon Bible that lay on the dresser in that lonely hotel room. I opened it and read those beautiful, immortal promises of Jesus that must have inspired countless generations of lonely, worried, and beaten men throughout the ages. A talk that Jesus gave to his disciples about how to keep from worrying. Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body more than raiment? Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. As I prayed, and as I read those words, a miracle happened. My nervous tension fell away. My anxieties, fears, and worries were transformed into heartwarming courage and hope and triumphant faith. I was happy, even though I didn't have enough money to pay my hotel bill. I went to bed and slept soundly, free from care, as I had not done for many years. Next morning, I could hardly hold myself back until the offices of my prospects were open. I approached the office door of my first prospect that beautiful, cold, rainy day with a bold and positive stride. I turned the doorknob with a firm and steady grip. As I entered, I made a beeline for my man, energetically, chin up, with appropriate dignity and all smiles, saying, "Good morning, Mr. Smith. I'm John R. Anthony of the All-American Law Book Company." "Oh, yes, yes," he replied, smiling too, as he rose from his chair with outstretched hand. "I'm glad to see you. Have a seat." I made more sales that day than I had made in weeks. That evening, I proudly returned to my hotel like a conquering hero. I felt like a new man, and I was a new man, because I had a new and victorious mental attitude. No dinner of hot milk that night, no sir. I had a steak with all the fixings. From that day on, my sales zoomed. I was born anew that desperate night 22 years ago in a little hotel in Amarillo, Texas. My outward situation the next day was the same as it had been through my weeks of failure, but a tremendous thing had happened inside me. I had suddenly become aware of my relationship with God. A mere man alone can easily be defeated, but a man alive with the power of God within him is invincible. I know. I saw it work in my own life. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. When Mrs. L.G. Baird of Highland, Illinois